Good afternoon. Does it work? Good afternoon, dear friends, colleagues, partners in crime. This is going to be one of the most exciting sessions. We have an amazing panel here, but I'm told to wait for a few minutes to see, just in case a few more people may want to come in. Today's discussion is really about the world we all care about, the policy world, and how to make it more effective, evidence-based, and for it to help us as consumers. Today's discussion, and before I start, a big shout out to IFPRI for pulling this all together and getting these different groups of people, silos, and breaking the silos and forcing us to think together on food systems. By now we know food systems is not fit for purpose. There's gloom and doom wherever one turns, whether it's on the emissions. With business as usual, we are looking at food systems to be the highest emitter by 2050. It is what's causing poor human capital. We heard a lot about nutrition, sustainable, healthy, sustainable diets, nitrification of oceans. And so systems that really helped us come this far are exactly what needs to change for food systems for future. And that's going to be a big discussion from our policymakers and our panelists today in terms of what's coming in the way for more effective policies and incentives. I've raised a lot of stuff that you already know on the emission side, on the adaptation gap, on loss of human capital. Every second person on this planet is malnutritioned, either no calories, wrong calories, or too much calories. And yet this food system relies of almost close to $1 trillion of public support, so which is what we call the subsidies or public finance. So if public finance has to change, it means incentives and policies need to change. And so that really brings together what we've been hearing in terms of what researchers are doing, what is the new evidence, and how do we ensure that policymakers are forced to take into account as they sit and design policies for the future. I will also like to, I see Brem and Farbod in the room, and under Brem and Farbod's leadership, the World Bank has just put together a South Asia Policy Leadership for Improved Nutrition, the sapling, which is again a very action-oriented platform that is hoping to to reduce the disconnect between what researchers are saying, what consumers want, and what policymakers are trying to do. There'll be a lot of learning. Mistakes will be made. People will be challenged. But it promises to be really a very exciting platform for all of us. With that brief background, it is my honor and privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Ranjit Singh. Dr. Ranjit Singh and I go back. We were also partners in crime when India had the presidency for the G20. And as you know, that during that G20, for the first time, food systems transition really made the headlines by the high-level Deccan principles for food and nutrition security that got endorsed by all 20+ AU heads of state. Today, Dr. Singh is the Joint Secretary for India's Ministry of Food Processing Industries, and has been handling the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampad Yojana, a flagship scheme of the ministry aimed at building modern food processing infrastructure in the country. With that, may I invite you for your keynote presentation. You have about 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you. Good afternoon, all. And Thank you, Ms. Sethi, for very nice words said about me. And it was a real pleasure working with you and your team during the G20, India's G20 presidency, and working on those negotiations, at times tough negotiations. But it was all a pleasure, and I believe good work got done with all support that we received from all the international organizations as well as the G20 members. Yeah, that as you have already introduced the topic, this topic is particularly close to me. I always look for evidence whenever we have to take the decision. So at times, many times, that evidence is simply not visible. With this, I'll start by saying that it's an honor for me to join this esteemed gathering at the Delivering for Nutrition conference. I thank the International Food Policy Research Institute and the World Bank for convening such an important forum, especially at a time when integrating agriculture, food systems, and nutrition policies has become very critical. I also thank the World Bank for providing me with this opportunity to be a part of this important dialogue. Today we meet to deliberate and unlocking opportunities for the policy wins, as the topic says, in the agri-food nutrition systems. It's a topic that resonates very, very deeply with India's developmental journey. As a nation home to over 1.4 billion people, India has witnessed firsthand how integrated policies are transforming nutrition outcomes, supporting livelihoods, and driving sustainable growth. To a large extent, I can say that India has succeeded in meeting the food needs of our citizens. The focus now is on nutritional part, so that every person gets access to a balanced food meeting all the nutrition requirements. Though meeting food requirements was a challenge, meeting nutritional requirements is a bigger challenge, requiring policy shifts in agri-food systems in the country and in the region as at large also. So that's what we are here for. The first challenge that I foresee is in understanding the simultaneous prevalence of undernutrition as well as obesity in the populations. Prevalence of undernutrition in well-endowed regions. I was looking into one of the reports which said, there were certain trackers that have been developed by the Ministry of Women and Child Development in India. It finds that the Gujarat state at bottom of many indicators, which is totally contrary to our imagination, Gujarat being at number 1 or 2 in terms of per capita income. So this is a challenge. Why is it happening there? It's a well-endowed region. So I'll say that how we design appropriate measures. To design those appropriate measures, we need to understand the underlying causes of that. We need to have that evidence. Why, where, how is it happening there? We have abundant food production, whereas the question remains if the food produced is enough to meet the food, and I underline the nutritional requirements of our people. Which are the areas experiencing deficient diets? How deep surveys are being conducted? What are the underlying causes of different deficiencies, be it of micronutrients, be it of vitamins, minerals, proteins? Why is it happening? Is it because the deficiencies of such nutrients in the soils on which the food is produced? Is it that the fodder that is being fed to the cattle used for milk and meat purposes? Or is it because the consumption patterns are different? People's dietary preferences are different. Why? Why there's a difference, and why is it happening? So that is where the role of evidence comes, and evidence which is credible, which is data that is very well collected as per the proper using scientific techniques. These questions point to the complexities that we have in the agri-food systems across various regions and countries, especially where the agri-food system is dominated by large number of small marginal farmers, as we experience in India, and it is true in most of the South Asian countries as well. We exactly cannot pinpoint how much is going to be produced, what produce will come up, what are the actual packaging practices being followed by those farmers. Though we have extension systems, very well R&D systems, agricultural R&D systems, as well as extension systems in the country, how much of that extension service is being consumed by the farmers and acted upon that? How is the post-harvest handling being done? What is the loss of nutrients after the crop is harvested? All those challenges remain. And see, this is the entire value chain. Once we produce, how it is processed, how it is handled, and then finally it reaches to the consumer's table, what actually the consumer gets to eat. That determines what nutrition that gets transferred from the production system to the consumption system. It is in this background that this session is of utmost significance, especially for developing countries, where generation of evidence in itself is a challenge, which many a times result in formulation of policies and interventions which are not fully aligned with the objectives those interventions intend to achieve. I'll say that if a policy is formulated on the basis of deficient evidence, it will not yield the desired results. It's as simple as that. Once the problem is identified, recognized, cause identified, solutions are there, we can find the solution. But if we are not able to find the real cause, we won't reach anywhere. So that's why I would like to emphasize, we need to have a solid evidence on the nutritional aspect. India, as we know, is one of the world's largest agricultural economies and is uniquely poised to lead transformative policy shifts in agri-food nutrition nexus. As we have realized, to ensure nutritional security, agricultural abundance alone is not enough. We must focus on evidence-based policies to bridge gap between food availability and dietary quality that holistically addresses production, distribution, affordability, as well as cultural preferences of the people. Now, with this session centers on pivotal theme, the power of evidence to influence policy that build trust among stakeholders, including governments, communities, and multilateral organizations. The recent success of landmark initiatives in India, that is Poshan Abhiyan, it exemplifies how strategic use of data has driven cross-sectoral collaboration and mobilized resources toward measurable outcomes. This Poshan Abhiyan has been a great success, especially in addressing the undernutrition amongst the children, as well as anemia in adolescent girls, lactating mothers, as well as pregnant women. This tracker, the implementation of the scheme, as well as the progress, is tracked through the integrated computerized system, IT systems. So where about 1.5 million workers, they visit households, they start tracking from the early stages of childbirth and before that the pregnant women. So it has shown very, very promising results. It not only shows the progress, it also indicates where the policy is not going right, where the interventions are not going right, how we can alter that and focus on the proper issues. While India has been making remarkable strides, we believe that solutions to global challenges like malnutrition lie in partnerships. Forums like this serve as invaluable platforms for cross-country knowledge sharing, enabling nations to adopt best practices and create synergies across borders. Looking ahead, our collective efforts must focus on integrating nutrition into every stage of food system, from production and processing to consumption. That is one of my favorite things to do and understand and profess as well, that we have to integrate the entire value chain, starting whether we can start from the research for develop those varieties, breed those varieties which are high in nutrition, as is the example of biofortification being done in India. We have developed many varieties which are rich in micronutrients, which are rich in iron, and that's how it's building. And also, and ultimately the consumers' education as well. They need to be educated that what is good, what is not so good for food. In conclusion, I invite all of you to collaborate, share insights so that together we can explore solutions that will advance nutrition security, not just in South Asia, but across the world. Together we can build resilient agri-food systems that nourish people, empower communities, sustain our planet for generations to come. With this, I thank you all for a patient hearing. I look forward to the insights and discussion from my esteemed panelists, colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's very good. Thank you, Dr. Singh. That was a great curtain raiser and a scene setter. And I think your point is exactly spot on. Moving from food security, which is caloric sufficiency, to nutrition security is not, it needs to happen, but it's not going to just happen because we want it. Policies have to be aligned. And also remember, there is no ministry in most countries called food. So it has to be really a lot of multi-sector, a lot of ministries coming together and agreeing on one outcome. And that sometimes itself can be a journey. With that, let me invite my panelists now. We'll definitely open up for questions and answers, and I hope you'll be able to stay for that because I'm sure our colleagues will like to hear more. May I invite Chimi Wangti, who served as the Secretary General of Tarayana Foundation from 2005 to 2021, one of the first Bhutanese CSOs working with the grassroots communities in remote rural corners of the country. Before that, she served as the head of policy and planning at the Bhutanese Ministry of Agriculture. It gives us a lot of pleasure to invite you. Is that online? Okay. Please come in, and we will be very rude and interrupt you at a few milestones, like 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and when times run out. She's not there? Okay, we can move to the next speaker so we don't waste time. It is my pleasure to invite Vinya Ariyaratne, who is the current president of the Sarvodaya Shramadana movement, having served as the president of Sri Lanka Medical Association until 2023. You have experience in public health, community development, disaster management, nutrition, child health, war-affected communities. Exactly what we are talking about, the multi-sectorality. May I invite you, sir? Please come. You want your presentation?
Yes.
And you'll need this,
Yes.
yeah?
Thank you. Good afternoon, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I would share an experience, a real-life experience from Sri Lanka. After Sri Lanka went through an economic crisis, as you all know, and the crisis actually affected Sri Lanka in 2022. Although preceding the economic crisis, we had the COVID-19, it has already had an impact on the vulnerable and the poor in terms of both poverty and also nutrition. And we know the causes that led to this crisis. It was a foreign exchange crisis, but it was more related to governance, as we all know, when we look at the changes that happened in Sri Lanka during the last few months as well. So food inflation was very high, 90%, and then the access to food. There was no food shortage in Sri Lanka. There was they were very expensive, and the poor and the vulnerable couldn't access food in terms of the because of the price escalation and other factors. So, we know that the poverty levels doubled by 2022, and I will explain the sort of trend because it is important. We are looking at evidence here and action. So, I come from the civil society background, though I am a medical professional, but also working at a technical level at national policy as well. So, as we all know, the role of civil society is very well recognized, and in terms of nutrition and food security in Sri Lanka, for decades civil society has also been playing a very important role, not just during emergencies, but also in between, reaching some of the unreached or underreached communities, including children or special groups who are unable to access the services from the state system. So, I look at when you look at data, we know that we had the COVID-19 in 2020 and 2021. Preceding that, we had of course, the normal course of development, but even though Sri Lanka is often held as a model for achieving good health at what we call low cost, or at a very Sri Lanka is a positive outlier when it comes to income, GDP and the health outcomes. We have had the nutritional levels of children and some other groups such as the pregnant mothers, and if you look at micronutrient deficiency, all that were lagging behind compared to mortality indicators. And then when you look at the COVID-19 situation, the COVID-19 of course exacerbated the existing problems that we have been having. So, as a civil society, our concentration was really on community development, and I represent the Sarvodaya movement, which is the largest grassroots development organization in Sri Lanka, and we had an integrated development program to address those issues from and it is a integrated program, holistic program from village level up, reaching about probably 1/3 of the villages in Sri Lanka. Then during the COVID-19, we had a program called Suvodaya, Awakening of Health, where we collectively tried to address the health and nutritional needs of most vulnerable groups, because we did not have the resources nor the movements allow us to operate throughout the country, but we selected, and then we were able to look after more than say like 30,000 children who are living in institutions, care homes in the country. So, such targeting was done. Then the most important response actually came during the economic crisis, and we named it as We Are One. We tried to be in solidarity with our own countrymen who were affected by the crisis. So, if you look at the situation before 2020, we of course have to look at data again. It is the household income and expenditure survey. Based on that, poverty level was at around 14%, but this is based on income poverty, and then of course, the poverty levels were varying between districts. These disparities are very evident in Sri Lanka, even for other indicators, including health indicators. So, if you look at the multidimensional poverty index, which was taken to another level later by having multidimensional vulnerability index by UNDP as well. So, we had no shortages of data to make decisions in this country, and we were able to see the trend, and what we have experienced is that during this period of 2.5 years, the poverty doubled in Sri Lanka. Out of the 22 million people, 7 million Sri Lankans are living in poverty, and 4 million who were not in the poverty bracket earlier were fell into the poverty bracket. And there are certain communities like the estate community, we enjoyed our tea, but the communities which produce the tea, they are the worst affected, one of the worst affected, in addition to some urban communities and other people in the rural areas. So, we could use the normal indicators. We had several sources of very reliable data. The normal, of course, HEIS is only looking at the income and expenditure, but of course, we had nutritional data coming from the routine weighing of children in the government health system, plus the Medical Research Institute, and also the surveys that are done by universities and other organizations. So, we could see the trend, and now we had to have a national response, because we are a large organization trying to coordinate with many other civil society organizations. So, we selected the districts which had the highest level of food insecurity. So, this is where we used data, and we tried to use the as recent data as possible, and then we selected, now you can see this tea producing district Nuwara had more than 50% of the household not having food security, and you can imagine the impact is generational. You can't just, so there is an emergency. So there was a nutritional emergency in Sri Lanka. So what we did was we prepared, our response was what we call VR1, and it had 3 components: setting up community kitchens very rapidly in preschools, in early child development centers and schools, food banks, and home gardening. It is an integrated program. So every preschool that we had access to through our organization and others set up these community kitchens, where women also participated. We were giving, of course, through grants that we received, food rations, and we had menus which are local menus, giving the required calorie requirement and also the micronutrients and everything. So this was, I am sorry, I am rushing because of the time. So it was a participation with the community. So it was not a charitable sort of one-off giving, but it is trying to also develop self-reliance so that they could sustain. Most of these preschool sustain even up to now. Then the food banks are where we received lot of dry rations. We mobilized the private sector. They were giving a lot of support to us, and then we provided dry rations. But even a poor family has to, when they take something, they are requested, if they can, to leave something. So they have some vegetables from their own home garden leaving. Same way we had the home garden, where we again got our friends from the academia to decide on the types of vegetable seeds that can grow in different areas of the country. So this integrated program consisting of these 3 components was being implemented for more than 2 years, and of course, once the emergency phase was over, some of the preschools of course went back to their routine meal provision, and we stopped our support, but then we still continue in certain areas. But we could develop an ecosystem. This is the learning that we had, bringing in the government health ministry. We had a multi-sectoral emergency nutrition intervention plan, and we also partnered with the private sector. So we had a process where we created an ecosystem where the donors could also come and support us, at the same time make it a sustainable program for the future. So then we could finally, we also had to address the severe acute malnutrition. There were more than thousands of children who identified having SAM, severe acute malnutrition, and they needed therapeutic feeding. You can't just give community feeding and correct the deficiency. So we had a very extensive system developed with the support of UNICEF. We were providing transport to these children to be brought to hospitals and clinics where therapeutic feeding was done. So we were able to, now the latest data from July show that at least we were able to improve the situation of severe acute malnutrition, but I must confess that we could not improve significantly the overall nutritional level of at least this group, plus the situation is still bad for other groups. So the conclusion is that a severe economic crisis leading to food insecurity calls for innovative and rapid action. We can't wait until all the data is collected. We have to act on the data that is available. Then policy and evidence need to connect to action, particularly in times of crisis. Action and lessons need to also feed to the policy. That is what we are doing now. And partnerships are very important between civil society, private sector, communities, academia, and also integrating CSO expertise and networks into national policy frameworks can really address food insecurity in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting case study for the sapling, because you had inflation, but here it's the CSO, the community, the CSOs that came in and managed the policy shortfall, really. And the question is then what policies now need to change that this doesn't get repeated. So I think it would be very interesting to think through this. I'm looking at the sapling command here. May I invite Dr. Seema Puri Dr. Puri is a retired professor from University of Delhi with over 35 years of teaching and research experience, has worked in several international organizations such as UNICEF and WHO, and serves as a committee member on many committees around South Asia. But more importantly, I heard today from Dr. Puri that many of the young men and women that were speaking today and talking about their research actually got mentored through you, with you. Please.
Thank you so much. Yeah, which is the one? This one is forward. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. And since the title of this session was from policy to unlocking policy, I'm going to talk about my experience in small attempts that we have made to influence policy and then action. And what I'm talking about is my work on infant and young child nutrition in India. And I think this is something that we all know, that the first 1,000 days is very, very critical for the development of the young child and for the future generation. We also know that in India, the indicators have not been too encouraging. And even with the NFHS 5, which is the latest data, the stunting and wasting rates are very high. The underweight rates are high, and correspondingly, overweight is increasing. So it wasn't a very nice picture. And side by side, the IYCF indicators were also poor. And we started this work, I've circled that in red, around that time, 2015-16. And what I'm trying to emphasize is that we kind of looked at it in a holistic view, and different pieces of research put together led to a strong advocacy. And that tended to influence the policy. I mean, I can feel happy to say I did influence, but I'm not sure how our group influenced, but yes, some influence definitely. So as we see, there has been slight improvement in the indicators, but not very heartening. So when we look at, for young scientists here, when we look at any problem and we want to make a difference, I think we need to look at how and what. And a situational analysis is very, very critical. We were fortunate to be working in South Asia. I'm part of a South Asian infant feeding research network. And so we had a collaborative effort with 4 or 5 countries that builds up more influence on governments to act. We need to look at where, when, what, who, identify all the stakeholders who could be influencing, and where is the point of contact that we can make a difference to it. So this was one of our first studies, like I said, by the Saffron Group, and this was all over South Asia, where we did who influences policy. So policies mapping, we also mapped the policies and did the stakeholder analysis. And we found that in India, there were 96 actors, of which 60% came from the government. And 20% were from development partners or international agencies, and the rest was from civil society and academia. Interestingly, industry didn't figure in this. Whereas there was this whole hype about industry influencing IYCF policy, it didn't do that. And we identified opportunities for intervention. And what we found was that at the national level, our policies were quite sound. But the implementation of these policies is at the state level. And that's where there were a lot of gaps which could be plugged in. What were the opportunities? One is that we only have guidelines for infant and young child feeding. So if it gets translated into a policy, the government implements it more seriously. And that was one opportunity. The other one was, like we've talked about, multi-sectoral, so linking it to other policies. And then, of course, a very big lacuna was counseling. And so improving the counseling support. Subsequently, interestingly, just a coincidence that many of these studies are World Bank funded. This was a study again which we did. So we went to the ground reality to see what is the IYCF practices at the ground level. And this was between Sri Lanka and India. And this is what we did in 11 districts of Delhi. We did a mixed method approach. We looked at all the stakeholders for working women. And what we found was that while the maternity benefits were all sound in place, the informal sector was not getting their due. And because of that, the complementary feeding practices were very poor. The IYCF indicators were very low. And the only support was the family support. So it was the mothers or the mother-in-laws or the husband who needed to be counseled. In the informal sector, it was the grassroots level worker or the Anganwadi worker. In the formal sector, it was the pediatrician or the doctor. And there were a lot of suggestions about a creche, about a feeding room in organizations, besides the 6 months maternity leave, but this was not being enforced. So ultimately, when we do any research, it's important to disseminate findings. And at dissemination, we had both a national level workshop and a regional level workshop where we had called the government, all the stakeholders, and this is Dr. Upul Senarath from Sri Lanka presenting here. And the basic dissemination that we did was to support the family to build up IYCN support, build capacity in IYCN, so things like lactation counselors and all, and to develop and to strengthen the maternity benefits. So these were the key messages here. And then again, we did the breastfeeding, the complementary feeding, because complementary feeding then emerged as a major lacuna. Breastfeeding rates increased, but complementary feeding rates did not increase correspondingly. And we did this across all socioeconomic groups, and as you can see, all the IYCF indicators were below the normal. And therefore, again here, the same thing came in, that we needed to build the capacity of the mother to complementary feed the patient, the child, and for that we need trained IYCF counselors. The Anganwadi worker is not she's too overburdened to do all this. And we also found interestingly that media was an important place, and for the upper socioeconomic group, it was the social media, which was Instagram and all, but for the lower socioeconomic group, it was the WhatsApp, because it's in local languages, Hindi and all, you don't have Instagram in Hindi. And therefore, these were also opportunities to tap. Interestingly, when we did this study, we found that commercial baby food and biscuits was a very large consumption, which was not really a surprise, but not yet documented. And therefore, this incidentally came up. We mapped out all the commercial complementary foods which were available in the market and online. This was again a WHO CRO project, and we mapped 278 of these snacks and things. And what we found was that they all met the labeling regulation. So incidentally, India has a very strong IMS code and labeling regulation. The regulatory framework for complementary foods is very, very strong. Unlike in Sri Lanka, we found the other way around. So this was again a learning, but biscuits unfortunately doesn't come under the BMS code. It's only for children up to 2 years. And based on these studies in South Asia, this is again another learning. WHO came out with this nutrient profile model for commercial complementary foods, which it has requested countries to adopt. So again, this is another thing of research getting converted into policy. An example, small contribution from us. So these are the key takeaways I've already talked about. I won't repeat that, but for our young, Dr. Ranjit Singh also mentioned, what does the government do, and how did maybe our research contribute to this? We have new guidelines in 2019. Unfortunately, we were not successful to convert it into a policy, but yes, something new has come in. The ICDS has been totally restructured with a lot of focus on complementary feeding, on young child feeding, on additional home visits to mothers to teach them about infant feeding practices, and convergence with other programs is very, very strong. Poshan Abhiyan, again, which Mr. Singh mentioned, one of the objectives of the Poshan Abhiyan is to build knowledge, attitudes, and behavioral intent to practice optimal breastfeeding and complementary feeding. So these are the two key themes. And in that, they have the home-based care of the young child, where an additional Anganwadi worker has been given to make home visits to promote complementary feeding. And a lot of other initiatives to promote complementary feeding have been developed. So there is, again, this Poshan 2.0 also focuses on behavior change communication, which was one of the gaps that we found. And they are having community-based events at the Anganwadi worker. Yes, and they have an Anganwadi, an Anna Prashasan Day. you know, there's a ceremony when cereal is introduced to the diet of the infant. So that is celebrated at the Anganwadi, and it becomes an opportunity for nutrition education for all those present there. So last but not the least, it's taken a long time, but this is 20th December 2024. We started in 2017. The Supreme Court ruling has come that all organizations should have a feeding room and a creche for feeding. So this is very heartening, and let's hope it gets enforced. Okay, so just to wind up, just a lesson, how do you translate evidence to practice? And so this evidence has to be sound, valid, real, it has to be documented. Dissemination, advocacy is very, very important. You know, many of our youngsters, their reports just lie on the cupboard, or you present a research paper at a conference. That doesn't work. You have to advocate with the stakeholders, with the policymakers, the program planners, the state level, the national level. Then only it gets integrated into policy and program, and then implemented and practiced. So at the end of it, I would say be persistent, be patient. Thank you very much.
Dr. Puri, you raised something. It had also crossed my mind in the last, this morning when I was listening to a lot of young researchers talking about their research, that it's so important to have a very, very strong communication strategy accompanying, because even when I was listening to what they were saying, it begs a question, so what? And that's the part that needs to be translated so, you know, consumers can understand, populations can understand, and policymakers can understand. And then one can hold feet to fire. So I think this is, and the second point you raised, which brought me back to my days of intergovernmental fiscal relations, is which level of government is most appropriate for what function. And I think for many of our countries in South Asia, that needs a very serious think or a rethink in some cases. So something else for the sapling to think about intergovernmental systems, service delivery policies, and shine a bit of light on that. With that, do we have Chimi Wangti online? Yes, we do. It's our pleasure to invite you to speak. Chimi has served as the Secretary General of Tarayana Foundation from 2005 to 2021. And before that was the head of the policy and planning of Bhutanese Ministry of Agriculture. We're going to invite you to speak, and we will be very rude and interrupt you in your 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and when your time is up. Over to you. She's not at the camera?
Okay, yeah, she's there now. I'm sorry, can you hear us? I'm sorry, can you hear us online? Okay, you've muted yourself. So perhaps you can communicate directly.
Jimmy, we can't hear you. Please unmute yourself. Hello. You have to can you unmute yourself? You're on mute. Hello. hear us? So can you, electricity went, so they had a power shortage. So what do you want to do in terms of your program? Okay, one second, can you just hear, connect it again? Sometimes they can talk to them, please. Come on. Sorry about
I think it sounds like an issue on her end.
Yes.
It's not a technical issue on this end. Apologies for that.
No, no problem.
Okay, just give us half a minute.
Okay.
If you can join. Jimmy, can you join? Hello? You join? Jimmy, can you talk?
Hello,
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Okay, we are very eager
Monica?
Yes, yes, you're. Yes, Jimmy, you can be
Yeah.
heard in the room, so you can start your presentation.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Managed to get in, but the electricity just blew in our area, so I guess I'm stuck. You are stuck listening to me on my phone. Thank you very much for your patience. You can understand why I'm stepping away from all the new age tech stuff, and old rusty fingers don't work too quickly, it seems. Thank you very much, IFPRI and the World Bank, for putting together these opportunities of trying to address things holistically. Next, please. Looking at Bhutan's situation, while we say we are almost food available, nutrition is still a very silent portion of it, and I think the entire region, for that matter, we are unable to talk of food and nutrition security in the same breath, and that is something that had been worrying quite a lot of us for a while now. Fortunately, very happy that this is being spoken. Even the conference title itself is hovering around the need for food to be looked as the ways and means of getting nutrition into our bodies. So, but we come from a region that is the most highly populated, and the entire region itself, there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think as a member of the Bees Network, the Tarayana Foundation is also keen to try and look at each other's best practices. Like Dr. Vinya just showed us a lot of beautiful work that they've done during the emergency period. Stuff like that can be replicated across the board. Small actions will definitely account to improving the nutritional outcomes of our children as well as our families. And these are the opportunities that needs to be scaled up, not to be lost between the cracks of trying to figure out who's responsible for looking after the nutrition and who's for looking after food production or for marketing and for the processing technology is part of it. Like earlier speakers have mentioned, food and nutrition, there are lots of players. I think Dr. Puri mentioned that there are some 90 plus actors, and all of these need to be aligned in order for us to make sense of how we can provide and improve the nutritional outcomes for those we work with, we live with, and we provide for. Next, please. I think nutrition cannot be looked at, food security or food and nutrition security, if your housing reality is that of staying in uncomfortable, very unhygienic conditions. So in that regard, the holistic approach to rural development is what Tarayana is good for. Our organization looks at nutrition in a more holistic manner, and it starts with the living conditions itself. And where we do not have the resources to try and build stuff for them, so it is every women, men, girls, and boys who come in and help in moving themselves out of the one-room sheds and huts to the houses of their dreams. Tara mobilizes, helps, and coordinates their efforts so that while they're doing work, it's meaningful and gainfully towards their own betterment, and empowering them along the way so that they don't have to wait for outside assistance the next time they need to do something like this. Next, please. It's also allowing people to dream, to be able to articulate their dreams. This lady here is from one of the remotest corners, and I was blown away by her eloquence in how she said that she never thought she had the freedom to dream, because what's the use of dreams if no one's there to assist her, lift her up to be able to live that dream or to make that dream come true. So these are small stories from rural Bhutan that actually makes it worthwhile to really put women and people at the center of everything, so that their own well-being is well placed in their own hands, and all that the rest of us can do is muster around them, gather our strengths around them so that they can take the necessary actions. Thank you for the reminder. Next slide, please. It's not that the rural areas lack skills. They have a lot of indigenous knowledge and skills that needs to be accounted for and highlighted, and then made use of so that they can bring some economic income. Next, please. These are consultations, some pictures of rural consultations, along with, I mean, like you talk with the rural seniors, the school-going children, as well as young boys and girls, and speak to their aspirations, listen to them, in fact, is what we do most. Take notes and then go back to them with programs and plans that are co-created. Next, please. Yeah, next, just another slide. Yeah, slide that shows the journey. And not everything is about high technology. We work with communities that can ill afford the steel frames. So we've concocted with bamboo polytunnels in the highlands to extend the growing seasons. Next, please. And while organic is a new movement, natural farming is by default. Not much chemicals penetrate into rural Bhutan. Organic farming is therefore a default. But because of the need for certification, the expensive certification processes, it is very few farmers who can afford to join that category. Although they don't use any chemicals on their farms, because it's not certified organic, we cannot call it such. So the whole nation, more or less, is, particularly in the rural areas, are all organic, natural farmers. Next, please. We're talking about cultivation in the mountains. When I was in school, in college, I remember they said 4% and more is slope, and you have to do all sorts of mitigation measures to ensure that soil loss is limited. But in our scenario, how is that possible? When you live in the mountains and you have to work with the nature, managing soil is another big issue. Next, please. Yeah, with the erratic rainfall and floods, flash floods that damage and destroy roads, take away infrastructure, as well as farmers lose entire cropping seasons because of these erratic conditions. But I mean, there's very little that Bhutan is doing to contributing to climate change, but we bear the brunt, thick brunt of it all. And areas and how to build resilience in these areas with the farmers, I think that is one important factor to be kept in mind when working on food and nutrition security. Next, please. Yes, water management. This is sort of, again, taking it to the locals themselves so that they are in charge of it. Next, please. And elephant pests are another, wildlife, we're talking about elephant. I just got a phone call just before this that there's an entire herd of about 25 in the southern belt, very close to where this picture was taken. Next, please. Okay, I think we can skip this. Next one. This was a small video showing the damage. Consultations with the young caregivers, young mothers about nutritional needs, requirements of their children. Next, please. Next, midday meals were provided here. And so discussing on how to take these programs and spread it further afield in the rural communities, using our rural participants as the agents of change themselves. Next, please. Sanitation is another aspect. Okay, time seems to be up. Next, please. I think that's about it. You can just run through the slides. I mean, these are some of the economic activities. Whoever's managing the slides, could you just run through it? Yeah. Some economic activities that, the communities coming together to help themselves, expanding the basket, smokeless stoves. And in way forward, I think we really have to talk about simple things, actually. The key messages that I would like to leave with is sort of food and nutrition security to be recognized as a basic human right, and let not a big corporation take away that right from the communities. Effective nutritional advocacy. I remember the chair actually mentioned the need for good, effective advocacy, and that is something that comes through very, very evidently, because research findings are very difficult to relate to in day-to-day lives. And so advocacy work has to be in messages that can be easily understood by people. And food as medicine is something that we live by. But for this to continue, we have to stop poisoning food system, farming systems, and food production systems. And the need to reduce the gap between farm to table. I think these are some of the messages, if not anything else, that we have to give due recognition and consideration for food and nutrition security to be recognized as a basic human right. I think that is important. Thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry for all the inefficiencies in getting connected, and also my lack of, yeah. The need for mental health was the next picture. That's, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think a very, very loud message of your presentation has been to have a holistic approach. And, you know, it's one of the shifts we've made collectively of moving away from agriculture to food, to really be able to show that there is an entire linkage upstream that needs to be taken into account. And unless until we don't do that, we are going to continue having the same issues where we've increased productivity, but it's come at a very high cost. With that, it is my pleasure to invite Farbod, our last panelist, after which we'll invite all the panelists on stage. Farbod is a senior agriculture specialist at the World Bank. Prior to his current post in South Asia, he developed the World Bank's enabling the business of agriculture program since its inception, leading its coverage over 100 countries and for policy work globally. Farbod.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I still have my full 9 minutes.
You do.
Wow, okay. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. You know, this is my first engagement with this conference, which has been taking place for a few years now, but when I had the opportunity to join, I thought, let me go and look at what has been done at this conference over the years. And I was really surprised to find an ocean, really, of knowledge, of information, of research associated to this conference. And I looked through that and I wondered how much of this information is reaching the policy leaders, the innovation leaders in our countries. 50%, 80%, 20%. I don't think it's being measured. But I do wonder about that because, you know, to reach policy and to reach innovation, it takes more than just good evidence. It takes more than a lot of evidence. It takes certain strategies of communication. And I wanted to just share with you a global example of how we try to shape our strategy of communication to be able to reach policy more effectively. And I'm going to mention just three points before I share with you this specific case. One is effective communication is not what is said. Effective communication is what is heard, right? How many times have we heard about somebody talking about a great conversation they had, and they say, oh yeah, I was able to tell them this and that and this and that. But very few times we hear about a good conversation when they tell us, oh, he or she was able to understand this and this and that, right? This mentality that communication is based on the listener, not based on the communicator, right? So this is one concept. Second principle, we all know of this, you manage what you measure. Until you don't measure, your ability to manage that information is very limited, right? And I put this up because this is a phenomenon, the fitness band phenomenon. How did it change our world in terms of managing our steps, our heartbeats, right? Our activity during the day? Before this became a fad, right? Or a marketing, you know, a marketing line, we weren't really managing nobody knew how many steps or what was their goal for the next day. As soon as there was a device that was put around a large percentage of people's hands, people started managing this information. And not only managing, comparing, oh, well, how many did you do? How many did you do, right? And that leads to my third point, benchmarking. Comparing ourselves to others. There's a power in benchmarking. And we have it across all different fields, right? Ever since we went to school, we would look at our grades and what grade did you get and what grade did what is the grade I'm supposed to get, right? Athletics, we're constantly comparing ourselves, seeing whose performance. So benchmarking is a natural instinct which allows us to compare ourselves to each other, provides inspiration, right? Gives us lessons. What is he doing that I can't do? And I put up this quote all the way back, you know, several centuries before Christ, where one philosopher talked about Socrates referring to how farmers in our agri-food systems comparing themselves to each other to know what is supposed to be done and what is not working, right? Benchmarking. So these three concepts led us to think, well, how can we communicate research, evidence in a way that's succinct, right? So it's easy to read. It's incisive, so it's not exhaustive. It doesn't have all the information, but it has the key points, the touch points. It's quantitative, so it's something we can measure, we can track, we can improve. And it's actionable, meaning that it falls directly under the influence, the action of policymakers. It's not just for their reference or not just to inspire them, it's actually something they can act on directly. So now, based on that, we thought, let's develop a dashboard, right? Let's develop a dashboard that has these these features, but you know, dashboards can look like this. And we didn't want a dashboard like this, right? We wanted something that looked a little bit more like this. Because it's different when you come before a dashboard like this than you see one like that, right? So again, succinct. So this led us to developing a project, a program. How many of you know the doing business work that the World Bank has been doing over the years? Can I see a raise of hands just to see how many? Okay. Now it's called Business Ready, right? This was very much in line with that approach. So a lot of what you'll hear here has to do with the doing business approach of the World Bank, where we recognize there are many factors that shape the enabling environment for, in this case, for agribusiness, right? And we decided we would hone in on one, just select one. We're not trying to cover everything and make it unmanageable. So we decided to focus on the legal, the regulatory framework, yeah? And based on that, we developed this project, this program called Enabling the Business of Agriculture. And what we did is we identified 8 indicators, which means 8 scores, right? Again, keeping the dashboard simple and easy to read and understand. But under each of these indicators, there was a mass of information. We're talking about dozens of sub-indicators, of data points, etc. And it had not only the dimension of what's in the books, it also had the dimensions what happens in practice. And we decided, again, recalling the value of benchmarking, we decided to cover over 100 countries, 101 countries to be exact, so that countries could compare themselves globally, compare themselves regionally. They can compare themselves to peers or competitors, right, or references. So we had quite a global coverage. And there's a little formatting issue taking place, but all of this information ended up in this. Out of 101 countries, what number are you? Okay, this is the case of Madagascar. Number 83. This number is tremendously powerful and very compelling to policymakers because it makes them think just across these 8 areas that underpin agribusiness, we are number 83. And you have a series, I'm not going to go into all the data that comes out of this, you have a series of scores, so you can see where you're weak, where you're ranking higher or lower, how you compare regionally or globally. You can see where you are in a specific area, comparison to all the other countries of the world. And you can see, for example, within a region, how do you rank? And where are some of your weaknesses, right? All of this, I'm making a summary of a summary. All of this, because of this format, led to a number of countries starting dialogue on this research. It was taken up by governments, taken up by boards, by chambers of commerce, et cetera, et cetera. These countries took up the evidence and started acting on policy directly based on this evidence. A number of initiatives came out, government programs took shape, reforms, collaborative initiatives, government working groups. And ultimately, this was the results chain we were looking for and we were starting to develop with this program, which is taking evidence, taking a report, but pitching it in such a way that it is taken up, it does generate awareness, it creates interest, it's integrated into dialogue, it leads to reforms, and ultimately it leads, in this case, to an improved enabling environment. So, just to finish up, 2 main points. It's not only about the data, about the evidence, no matter how relevant or revealing it is about the way that it is communicated, the format, the right time, the right place, and the right way. And second of all, there's nothing that's more compelling, especially to policymakers, than comparisons and contrasts, the ability to compare your own reality to a different one that you might aspire to or you might be inspired by. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we can, thank you very much. We have maybe 10 minutes for questions, comments, thoughts, disagreements with our keynote speaker and the panelists. Please, if you step up. Yes, please. Prem, why don't you break the ice? There's no one else. Why don't you? Anybody?
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Dinushad. I'm representing Sabha Sri Lanka as a CEO. So one suggestion from my end, because of we have been engaging in food sector in last 15 years. So you need to address like the food adulterations. There are some areas. So for example, today I came across one of the experience. I had a lunch, one of the shop. So they use garlic skin to taste the curry. So those are the area, and some other products are there. They are use some chemicals to increase shelf life. So it's some, there is no measurements to those chemicals. So therefore, I think the research area, if you can focus on that, that will be really great. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take a couple of questions. I know the young lady here had a question. Yeah, you can take this.
Hi, I'm just going to take advantage that this is a learning lab and ask a bit of an open-ended question. I'm Anita from IFPRI. You talk about comparative statistics, and so the government might not just agree with that, right? They might say that we don't agree with this report. And yesterday in the plenary, someone mentioned you can just change the definition. How do you tackle a situation like that? Yeah, that's all.
3 is a charm. Let's have one more question. Oh, there. And then we turn to panelists.
Yeah, I'm Drishti from IRV, New Delhi. The question is so for all the panelists, if it is about evidence to impact, how are we measuring the impact? Are we interviewing? Are we getting feedback? As in, that question was raised but was not answered, I guess. A little more thought on that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So the first question, food adulteration, yes, that's a very important issue. And I think every country may be facing a different level. Also the regulations and the monitoring of the food products may vary from country to country. Like I can speak for India, and Mr. Singh is also here from the ministry. But FSSAI, we have the Food Safety and Standards Institute. They are very, very strong in regulation. Of course, when it comes to field level monitoring, there may be certain lacunae because it's a very large country. So that depends from country to country, and yet it is an issue which we cannot overlook. The second question which I can answer is, how do you measure, was it? Okay, measure impact, and I think Farbod would like to add to it. But you see, when you do strong advocacy, when you have evidence and you do advocacy, and somewhere down the line the government policy changes or the program incorporates something, you can feel happy that maybe it was a tiny drop in the ocean which you contributed to make the change. You will not get a direct expression of gratitude that it was due to your research that this change came about, but definitely evidence and advocacy becomes very, very important to push it with the policymakers. And somewhere down the line, like Farbod said, it has to be brief, concise, succinct, so that a policymaker is not a nutritionist, he's not a health scientist, he's an administrator. And he should be able to understand how to translate science to action. And if you're able to convince them, they are, I think, very open to suggestions. I think you'd like to add to it as an administrator.
Yeah, thank you very much for setting the floor. I'll add to that, see, there's a lot of research happening, lot of information being created, lot of data being generated. But in which form it reaches the person who is to take a call, take a decision. That is the most important aspect of that. Okay. I mean, second aspect is we have a large number of research organizations and institutions. If I say about India, in the agricultural R&D, there are about maybe 130 plus central government organizations under the Indian Council of Agricultural Research. There were roughly must be about 60, 70 agricultural and animal sciences universities. And plus there are food and nutrition departments in many other universities. They're doing a lot of research on that. But what part of that research actually goes up and reaches the policymakers? And it in which form? If there's a huge overload of information, it won't be able to have its impact and get included into the policymakers. So one, evidence, data, information has to be generated, and it has to be presented in a form which is easily legible, understandable to the person who has to act on that. That is very important. Regarding regulations, as and Dr. Puri said, in India we have an act, that is Food Safety and Standards Act, and under which the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India has been established. They have very stringent norms as far as the packaged food is concerned. So it has the labeling requirements, everything has to be labeled and whatever ingredient has gone into it. However, there are certain shortfalls in the food business operators where the restaurants are there, what kind of preparation they prepare and offer instantly. So that is one part which needs to be addressed. Over the period of time, as we evolve, our systems are maturing. So these things are also coming into place. I mean, the surprise inspection do happen. They do check up various food and drug regulators across the states. They do take samples of various items that are being sold and served in the restaurants as well. But as Dr. Puri mentioned, because just the availability of food inspectors, the numbers, and the number of institutions, restaurants, and other food business operators who are there, it's simply too large, and at times there may be certain instances where people are not serving up properly. I think that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. We have two questions, and it's 4:17, and the next session is at 4:30. But we'll take the two questions and then close the. Okay.
Thank you. I'm Javindra Bhandari. I'm from Nepal. My curiosity is regarding the presentation from Bhutan. It's quite interesting, the narratives of food. I would be interested to know that how the narratives of the foods are, shaped by social, cultural, political, economic, psychological factors, if it is under that, and how, if the engagement, another part is how the poor and socially marginalized communities in the rural areas are included in the process. How the process has really considered that part from the intersectionality perspective. I think that area of knowledge, or that area of practice makes great sense. So if there is any observations, it would be great. Thank you.
We have one more question.
Myself, Dr. Satish Karande from Maharashtra, India. My question to Mr. Singh. In India, more than 80% farmers are engaged in rain-fed agriculture. Rain-fed agriculture. At this situation, biofortification is the solution, or integrated farming system is the solution?
I'm sorry, should I just read the last one? Okay. So we have a question from online from an anonymous person.
So this is for Farbod. I'm curious to know if comparisons among countries could be counterproductive, and if you could speak to that. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'll start off, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Also answering to the earlier questions that might be more related directly also to EBA. So when it comes to evidence not being accepted, of course, our methodology has to be as robust as possible and always open to criticism. I think in EBA, we always kept our methodology transparent. We welcomed feedback. In fact, the methodology was refined at times from this feedback, right? And this also took place in doing business. So, and ultimately, you know that policy making, the only actors and policymakers in policy making aren't the actual policy deciders. It's all these other actors around that are involved in the dialogue that leads to that policy making. So, you know, criticism or comments on your methodology, on the evidence, are most welcome because it actually generates awareness that ultimately reaches those policy deciders. Now, when it comes to measuring impact, I would say impact could, if you put a lot of effort into it, impact can be measured only as the direct outcome of that evidence. So again, in the case of EBA, we had those scores. We took those scores to the governments and the policymakers, right? We saw the kind of dialogue that took place as a result of that and the reform that took place as a result of that, right? Even then, we could not take full credit of it, but that's as much as impact as we could measure. But everything that comes afterwards, it's far from any attribution to the research that was done. There's a recognition of that. But at least we try to track as much as possible within the results chain the effect of that evidence. Finally, the comparisons, the positive and the negative. Of course, there can be countries or there can be situations that are discouraged by the comparisons, right? Again, look, I gave the example of academics, our children that go to school, athletics, you know, performers. They can also be discouraged by falling underneath or beneath the performance of somebody you are expecting to be surpassing. But that's where really the communicational style becomes critical. Working closely with the policymakers, the intended target, working closely with them, coming across not as an evaluator, but as a partner, as a collaborator, right? And helping them see this as an opportunity to identify some of the areas where they can strengthen themselves. And always when there is a comparison where they fall beneath another country, there are also some points where they're above another country, and that can always be harnessed for good.
Thank you for both.
I think they're ringing the bell.
Yeah, quickly to answer this question of rain-fed area and whether biofortification will be better. First thing regarding rain-fed part in India, it's not 80%, it is like, now we are almost half and half. It is 50% is irrigated and 50% is rain-fed. It may be 42, 58 or something like that. That is the percentage. So that is how we have increased the irrigation potential in the country, and area under irrigation has gone up quite significantly after independence. Biofortification is basically may not have a very direct correlation with whether the crop is grown in an irrigated land or a rain-fed area. Biofortification is more to do with the content in the soil of various nutrients. Okay. Generally, it depends on the evolution of the soil from where, if there are black cotton soils, they generally rich in organic matter and many nutrients. If it is grown in if some crop is grown in the light soils, like sandy soils, they are generally deficient in many nutrients. So one is, okay, you provide those nutrients that the content will improve. Another option is we go for biofortification or fortification. As fortification of rice is being done and that fortified rice is being provided in the public distribution system. There are questions of acceptance of that fortified grains and kernels. It is always better if the ingredients, nutrients are built into the crop, into the grains as they are produced. So it is always a preferable choice. But only things is there are breeding limitations. That is very genetically driven characteristic, whether how much nutrient content can you build by breeding. So there is no one or zero or one kind of yes or no or 1:1 situation. It is like we have to go for a balanced approach, and wherever we can build in biofortification, very good. If it is not, we have to add the supplements, so that the nutrition level at the consumer level, the consumer gets a properly nutrient-rich food to consume.
Thank you very much.
I hope I have answered that question.
I'm sorry, we're completely out of time, and I just want to thank the World Bank and the Sapling team for just an absolutely wonderful learning lab. We are starting our next plenary session right now. There's no break whatsoever, and all of the other participants are in the other room. So just a warm thank you, and if anyone wants any further information, then I'm sure that you'll also be around. So thank you very much, and please join us in the Lotus Ballroom. You're welcome to do that, but the participants are going. I think that's, you've brought your photographers, is it? So you're welcome to organize. Okay. Did you show them the tape? Yeah. Okay.